Society of the US. When I'm finished with a brief introduction of, I'm getting the recording in a minute here, a brief introduction of Melinda, Tracy is going to help with the Q&A, and Tracy is the board member on the William Morris Society, librarian for the Arthur D. Jenkins Library at the George Washington University Museum and Textile Museum. So Tracy will help with the Q&A and will take over that portion of it with Melinda. Melinda Watt has been chair and Christa C. Thurman Curator of the Textile Department at the Art Institute of Chicago since 2018. In this role, she oversees the Global Textile Collection and leads the Textile Installation Program, both within the department and throughout the museum. Our current exhibition at the museum, Morrison Company, The Business of Beauty, is on view until June 13th, 2022. Her next exhibition, Fabricating Fashion, will open at the Art Institute later this year. Previously, Melinda Watt was a curator at the Department of European Sculpture and Decorative Arts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as well as supervising curator of the Antonio Ratti Textile Center. She was a co-curator of Interwoven Globe, the Worldwide Textile Trade, 1550 to 1800 in 2013, and she organized an exhibition of the museum's collection of 17th century embroidery at the Bard Graduate Center. The catalog, English Embroidery from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, 1580 to 1700, Twixt Art and Nature, was awarded the Textile Society of America's Annual Book Award for 2008. In addition to teaching for NYU, the Bard Graduate Center and CUNY Graduate Center, Watt also organized a series of small, focused textile installations that covered a diverse range of topics, including women's embroideries, Renaissance velvets, 18th century menswear fabrics, and the textile and wallpapers of William Morris. So I give you, happily, Melinda Watt.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Jude, and it's very nice to meet you and see some other names that I recognize here on the screen. So I am going to share my screen now because I have some, what I like to think are some very nice images for you. And hopefully you are now all looking at an introduction slide. Morrison Company making an exhibition? Yes, nodding. Okay, great. So thank you again for inviting me and for the introduction. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to speak to you about the current exhibition in the Textile Department galleries at the Art Institute and to share with you some of the riches of our collection of works by Morrison Company. Many of these works are being exhibited here for the first time. The exhibition comprises a selection of over 40 textiles and wallpaper designs created by the company from the 1860s to as late as the 1930s. This exhibition would not have been possible without the 2018 donation by John and Neville Bryan and the Crabtree Farm Foundation, which included 25 wallpaper samples and 52 textiles by Morrison Company. And I want to note that while we do have this stellar collection of designs by William Morris, John Henry Durrell, May Morris, and their colleagues, we did not publish a catalog to go with the exhibition. As you know, there is a mountain of literature about William Morris. And as you probably also know, a comprehensive survey of his artistic output was published in November of last year by the Victoria and Albert Museum, simply titled William Morris. William Morris Textiles by Linda Perry, which is now, I believe, in its third edition, remains the standard reference on the subject. I also want to acknowledge some others whose influence has been felt in this project. The May Morris Arts and Crafts Designer, which was published in 2017, is a really beautiful and thorough consideration of May's career and life. I've had helpful conversations with Karen Prothero at the Sanderson Design Group and Thomas Cooper, whose PhD research at Cambridge is centered on May Morris. Of course, William Tyre, director of the Glesner House here in Chicago, has also been a generous collaborator. And last but not least, I'd like to mention Sarah Leonard, who's here as well, and her work really helped shape one part of the exhibition, which you will hear about in a couple minutes. So many of you, perhaps most of you, will know more about William Morris than I do in terms of his biography and his life as the polymath that he was. So I will really concentrate this talk on the exhibition and what I've done and the themes that I have tried to bring forth for the business, for the exhibition. As you know, the business that was Morrison Company was founded over 160 years ago in 1861. William Morris had several business partners who bought out in 1875. Here you see a very well-known image of the 449 Oxford Street location, which was occupied until 1917. So while the firm made furniture, stained glass, ceramic tiles, I would like to argue that the fabrics and wallpapers for interior decoration were really the bread and butter of the operation, and certainly are the bread and butter of the operation now, as it is continued, as the designs continue to be retailed by Sanderson. So the original Morrison Company closed its doors in 1940. And again, Sanderson bought up the designs. They had been printing the wallpapers since the 1920s. One of my favorite images of William Morris is this caricature. Morris as an artist, designer, social activist, novelist, poet, lecturer, and publisher was famously unhappy with having his portrait taken. So the caricatures that exist by his friend Edward Burne-Jones, I think are really revealing and charming. So here we have Morris giving a weaving demonstration. And well, as you know, he benefited from the elite education at the University of Oxford. He taught himself weaving, embroidery, carving, printing, and dyeing. He read widely on these subjects and collaborated with experts in various fields, notably Thomas Wardle and their dye experiments. So these explorations really formed his idea about both aesthetics and production methods and how to marry the two in a way that he did not see happening in 19th century industrial Britain. A bit about the recent anniversary. So last year was the 160th anniversary of the founding of the original Morrison Company. This is a screenshot from the Sanderson website where they did a number of very sort of romantic images. Here we have a kind of Jane Morris wannabe dressed in or draped in a number of different fabrics. Notably, several years ago, Ben Pentreath, who collaborates with Sanderson and Zoffany, the umbrella firm, refreshed a series of Morris patterns for wallpaper and for fabrics. Another new, so you see here blackthorn wallpaper in these kind of rich but sort of hot, almost 70s color, and you see willow bough on the curtain looking through the doorway in a very hot sort of turquoise and lime coloration. The background for this presentation is also from a new line called Pure Morris. This is based on an 1879 wallpaper called Acorn, and it is installed throughout the exhibition. Of course, as you know, during Morris's lifetime, this monochrome treatment would never have been produced, though selected patterns of both textiles and wallpapers were produced in more than one color. Morris patterns are found in a variety of surprising places and have a presence in both high and low culture in the 21st century. In the world of fine arts, artist Kehinde Wiley, whose St. Jerome hearing the trumpet of the Last Judgment that you see here, has really activated Morrison Company patterns in his paintings. Wiley grew up in LA in the 1980s, and his mother ran a secondhand store where he was introduced to furnishing fabrics and came across a lot of arts and crafts era fabrics, including Morris fabrics. The pattern in the St. Jerome painting was based on a printed cotton called honeysuckle, which was designed by Morris in 1876. Wiley says he took the so-called DNA of Morris and built upon it to create hybrids of his own, adding a little chaos, and I would argue even a little claustrophobia, by pulling out bits of the pattern and submerging his sitters in the pattern. He's interested in how these multi-layered designs can be used to suggest the confinement of his Black sitters as an analogy to their position of relative powerlessness in society. On the decidedly low culture end of the scale, one can find everything from oven mitts to pandemic face masks. I was recently given a pair of garden secateurs that are decorated in a John Henry Durrell wallpaper design. Most of these are unauthorized copies of patterns, but the dress in the center was made by H&M in 2018. And this is the Pimpernel pattern, which is, again, a very popular wallpaper. We'll see an example of that in a couple of slides. This is a collaboration, again, with the Sanderson Design Group. I own that dress. It is hanging in my office closet right now. It's obviously a fantastic Morris pattern, not a terrific quality fabric though. In talking about the exhibition, I really want to explain to you a bit about the design collaboration for those of you who won't be able to see the show. I worked with two young designers who are on the staff of the Art Institute of Chicago. Mark Choi was the graphic designer and Samantha Grassi was the exhibition designer. Mark had never designed an exhibition before, but had a lot of experience in digital graphics. However, he did happen to be a fan of Morris, and I was really delighted with our collaboration and our discussions about the typeface, the font that we chose here. This is a font called Keiko. C-A-K-O, which is not an arts and crafts era font, but it is a font, it's a contemporary font, it's a modern font that we thought really expressed a kind of handcraft, gave a kind of handcraft feeling. Mark also suggested the blow up of the pattern that you see here on the right-hand side, and has become a bit of a selfie wall. So this is the first gallery of the exhibition. We introduced the visitor to the work of the firm. Tapestry weaving is demonstrated by the one tapestry in our collection, Pomona, the goddess of orchard and gardens, as well as furniture and woven wool fabrics. Since Morris is so quotable, we open the exhibition with words that express his idealism about art and life from his 1877 lecture titled The Lesser Arts. We use the quote, "I do not want art for a few any more than education for a few or freedom for a few." And here I want to point out one of exhibition designer Sam Grassi's really important contributions. This image is perhaps a little lighter, certainly lighter than what you see in the galleries. We do keep the galleries at 5-foot candles, which is the conservation recommendation for textiles and works on paper. You see, hopefully you can see in the background on your screens, the acorn wallpaper. I was really thrilled about the idea of putting wallpaper into the exhibition, and was sort of, let's wallpaper everything. One of Sam Grassi's contribution was to say, let's not wallpaper everything. Let's think judiciously about where we put the wallpaper. So she installed the wallpaper only behind works of art, which is exactly what I wanted to do, so that our visitors have the sense of a multi-layered display of textiles and textures and objects. because essentially we're looking at late Victorian interiors where there would be multiple pattern on pattern, tone on tone. But what Sam did was she suggested that we put a dark frieze, the indigo color that you see on the walls, so that it would actually bring down the visual height of the room and make it look like more of a domestic space. I want to highlight this glorious Morris chair after designs by Philip Webb. This is a loan from the Crabtree Farm Foundation. It is upholstered in the Crown Imperial wool damask. And again, just to tell you a bit more about the Crabtree Farm Foundation, this is a foundation that was founded by John and Neville Bryan. The late John Bryan, he passed away in 2018, and he was, as I mentioned, responsible for giving the museum a very large gift of textiles and wallpapers. The Crabtree Farm Foundation is a working farm. It is a site for the study of arts and crafts. It is a site for the study of British and American decorative arts. I was first introduced to the foundation and to the Bryans in 2006 when I was working on another project. And I just want to share this sort of picturesque image from that visit with you. That's a restored arts and crafts era barn, and I'm up in a restored grain tower taking the picture. So back to the Art Institute collection. Again, Pomona here, this Pomona Tapestry was made as one of a pair with another of the goddess Flora, goddess of flowering plants in springtime. Morris called tapestry weaving, quote, the noblest of weaving arts, in which nothing is mechanical. By this, he means that the skill of the tapestry weaver in interpreting and design is essential because the weavers themselves are controlling the distribution and the density of color without the aid of a patterning mechanism that you would find on a more complex loom. This particular work, which may be familiar to you, is a collaboration of at least two designers, the artist Edward Burne-Jones, who drew the figures for the series, for the pair, I should say, and artisan and designer John Henry Durrell, who designed the background. An earlier version of this, which is still in a private collection, was executed in embroidery with a different background that was designed by William Morris himself. The importance of the weavers, of the tapestry weavers, is indicated by the fact that we actually know the names of the weavers here. You can see on the caption, Walter Taylor and John Keitch. We don't have this kind of information for specific printers of either fabrics or wallpapers. This slide shows us the second space in the exhibition, where I've attempted to give more of a sense of the variety of patterns available to the Morrison Company consumer, and to really explicitly give the indication that while Morris and his colleagues were designers and artists, they are also business people. The wall text here includes arguably William Morris's most famous quote when it comes to the decorative arts from the 1880 lecture, The Beauty of Life, which is, have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. I was giving a colleague's mother a tour several months ago, and she said, I have that on a coffee mug. So again, it's everywhere. One of the most beloved patterns today is, of course, Strawberry Thief, originally designed in 1883. And it is a block printed cotton made with natural indigo, madder, and other colors derived from plants and minerals. Morris worked with dye chemist Thomas Wardle, who I mentioned earlier, and they worked together back and forth, corresponded back and forth, had a very rich and fruitful collaboration. The longevity of this and other Morris patterns is revealed in a number of ways. We know the dates of the patterns because, of course, they are registered, are equivalent of a copyright. However, we don't always know when a work was made. These are repeating patterns. They were made for decades. However, on the printed textiles, we often have evidence in the side finishes or the selvages, which are printed with the location of the retail shop in London at the time that they were made, which gives us a rough date range. Kind of as an aside and further evidence of how popular Strawberry Thief is, apparently there was a video game designer in residence at the Victoria and Albert Museum in, I believe, 2014. And she designed a game based on Strawberry Thief, where the little birds would fly across the screen, and as they flew across the screen, more of the pattern would reveal itself, and as they picked the strawberries, then bursts of flowers and fruits would come forth. Another really crucial loan is from the Crabtree Farm Foundation, is a series of actually 4 brochures. Morrison Company products were marketed by exhibiting at the international exhibitions, such as the 1862 exhibition in South Kensington. As I've alluded to, Morris also, as you know, lectured widely and published widely, which served to introduce his work to a variety of audiences in the UK, in Europe, in America. But after his death in 1896, the firm did produce a series of advertising brochures. Again, we have 4 examples, which are on loan from the Crabtree Farm Foundation. This one has the 449 Oxford Street retail address and the Merton Abbey name, the main site of the printing of textile production. There are in the group, though, there is another of the brochures with the same address on it, and then it has a new address pasted in. So apparently these were printed and then continued to be used for probably at least a decade or so. This is one of my favorite sort of vignettes in the exhibition. I had envisioned these wallpapers being framed and being hung on this grid, beginning with Fruit and Daisy in the upper right-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, both from the 1860s. These are some of the earliest and most perennially popular patterns. These patterns were both used in the Morris home at Kelmscott Manor. Pimpernel from 1876 on the upper right was the basis for the dress that I showed you from H&M. And Willow Bough from 1887 on the lower left is now interpreted as a wallpaper in several colors. I mentioned that in the Ben Pentreath collaboration, where he's changed the colors to sort of turquoise and lime green. It's also printed on linen, and it has been reinterpreted as an embroidery in the past couple of years. I'm really pleased, thanks to the recent scholarship about Mae Morris and several key donations from the Crabtree Farm Foundation, to be able to have a small section about the work of Mae Morris in her own right. So Mae, as you know, was born in 1862, the younger of Jane and William Morris's 2 daughters. She and her sister Jenny were raised in that incredibly creative household with their parents' friends and collaborators constantly around. The girls and their mother acted as models for Edward Burne-Jones and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. These families were, as you know, part of the Morris family social circle. Mae wrote in her later life about being a tomboy, about playing outside and making messes with her father's dye experiments. She also learned the skill of embroidery from her mother and design in this environment that encouraged creativity of all sorts. While William himself never visited the United States, Mae embarked on an extended tour of the country in 1909 and stayed for about 6 months. She confined her lectures to the arts, but the press was particularly curious about her activities around women's suffrage. She seemed reluctant to enter the debate here in America, although she did attend a rally for suffrage in New York City. But obviously her activities in England supporting women artists and artisans were certainly a continuation of her father's interest in supporting artisans and her interest in supporting women in the field. So this portrait was taken, we think, around 1909, possibly specifically for the brochure for her lecture tour. This embroidered table cover, decorative table cover, was designed by May and is really one of the treasures now of our increasingly excellent collection. The pattern for me really exemplifies her philosophy of design, in which she studies natural forms and then produces a simplified or stylized interpretation of each flower and plant that then serves the overall pattern. This work also shows off the skill of the embroiderer who stitched it. We don't know who that is. It might have been May, but I believe it was certainly a professional within the Morrison Company circle. It's mostly a simple darning stitch, which we see in many of the Morrison Company embroideries, but the change in the direction of the stitches which flow with the shapes of the petals and of the leaves really demonstrates a professional level of skill and control. And I'm sorry we're not able to enjoy it on the screen, but it does have just a lovely glow and almost a shimmer to it with the change of direction in the stitching. Here, we're lucky to have an example of what would have been a kit, an embroidery kit. So on the left, you see a watercolor drawing by John Henry Durrell, which is in the collection of the Huntington Museum. This is for an embroidery design called Peony. And on the right, you see an unfinished panel marked for embroidery, but never completed, based on this design. This would have been sold as a kit, and it came to the museum with this amount of embroidery work. Obviously, we did not pick up needle and thread to start work on it. We think that these kits were sent to consumers with a small portion of the needlework already done, and this would give the buyer a guide to stitches and coloring. Kits could be purchased at a fraction of the price of finished goods, so not only would a maker have the satisfaction of creating her own work, she could save a significant amount of money. I think what's interesting about this drawing from John Henry Durrell too is we know it's a drawing by Durrell, but May has annotated it and has suggested the way in which this particular design might be used and what it might be paired with if, say, it was used as an alternating design for a room screen. So while John Henry Durrell at this point, after William Morris's death, was officially the art director, I think that he and May probably had a very fruitful relationship in terms of deciding how designs should be used. Here is an installation shot of vine leaf and hanging above the peony embroidery. I think I mentioned the kit came to us with over 100 skeins of thread, and I've tried to arrange them in a way that suggests the colors that that arrived. I tried to name or assort all of the colors, but there are such subtle differences in these 106 or so skeins of embroidery that I really couldn't tell if a skein was a faded version of the one that it was next to, or if it was actually a different color. It's just a beautiful variety, a beautiful array of colors. This is a page from the Upholstered Furniture catalog we think from about 1917. And I'm showing you this because it has both room dividers, for which a design like Peony would have been used, and room divider screens, and also fire screens. We are extremely fortunate to have 2 fire screens in the collection, which were given to us. Again, they came to us in 2018 with the Crabtree Farm Foundation gift. On the left, we see a design called Flower Pot, which was designed by William Morris, We know that May did execute at least one version of this design within the workshop. And on the right, we see honeysuckle, which is a design attributed to May. Above is a floral valance or a border, which is also attributed to May Morris. I think that the fire screens, like the embroidery of peony, could be bought as either complete pieces of furniture, which I suspect is how the flower pot design on the left was purchased, or a consumer could buy an embroidery kit, do their own stitching, and then return it to the company and have it popped into the fire screen, which I suspect is how the honeysuckle design was worked. It is, it's a very fine piece of embroidery, but it doesn't have the finesse of the flower pot work, nor the other design by May Morris, the vine leaf embroidery. This is one of my favorite images of the Merton Abbey works. We see one of the buildings of the Merton Abbey works on the River Wandle, where most of the fabric printing was done. Again, this site was used for textile printing since at least the 1750s. And Morris writes very poetically about how the river lent itself to preparation and multiple washings that were necessary. He called the River Wandle his helpful stream. In this small section of the exhibition where we highlight some of the printed fabrics that are named after rivers, we use a quote from some hints on pattern designing from 1881. "It will be enough for us to clothe our daily and domestic walls with ornament that reminds us of the outward face of the earth." I think we would agree that Morris was really an early environmentalist, and he was extremely concerned about the effects of industrialization, both on the natural world and on human society. In 1896, Morris himself commissioned the landscape and architectural photographer Frederick Evans to record Kelmscott Manor and its surroundings. These photographs were not actually completed until just after Morris died in October of that year. We have a set of lantern slides. We don't have a set of prints. We have a set of lantern slides from this series of Kelmscott Manor. This is the one, very famous one of William Morris's bedroom, with the poem that Morris wrote to his comfortable bed, which May then translated into a design for a valance and complemented it with her very beautiful design for the curtains on the side. I love these images that Evans took. They really are, they really give you a sense of what has just happened. The great man has just left the room, has left the earth. They're very sort of casual. I mean, I do wonder about the beautiful embroidered curtains being sort of tossed up on the bed as if they were about to sweep the floor, and the towel hanging out at the foot of the bed. But what you will see, those of you, if you've been to Kelmscott Manor, you see that this bed still exists, the embroidery still exists, but there was a different bed cover on it. Here we have an example of the fabric called Wandle, named Wandle after the helpful stream, after the River Wandle. It's used as the bed cover on the bed, and you can recognize hopefully you can see in this image the very distinctive kind of barber pole stripe of the meandering stem in the design of Wandle. Here I want to point out and point out for visitors a couple of different aspects of pattern design and of printing for our audiences who aren't familiar with these techniques. Of course, drawing a repeating pattern is an incredible skill, and those people who are not familiar are very impressed with this sort of jigsaw puzzle like pattern, which needs to work both vertically and horizontally to create the seamless pattern that you see here on the right. This is the pattern called Evenlode. So in the 1880s, as Sarah Leonard has written very eloquently about, William designed a series of patterns that were named for various rivers in the Thames River system. These tributaries that all fed the Thames were historically important to light industry and transportation. This included the Wandle, it included Cray, it included Evenlode. And here we have an example of Cray. The other aspect of these river named designs that I think is particularly interesting is his use of a very recognizable type of textile composition, which is based on 14th, 15th, and into the 16th century, but mostly 14th and 15th century European textiles that have this very strong diagonal element, that have these, as you see on the left-hand side, the Florentine velvet from the first half of the 15th century, this strong stem that is holding these large stylized flower heads and scrolling leaves. Morris has taken that idea and turned it into a pattern that is very English, with flowers that we recognize from English gardens. But he's used this meandering design in all of the river named patterns, which I think is very apropos for that type of textile, for something that is inspired by the wandering streams and the flowing rivers. This also speaks to Morris's very deep and broad knowledge of historical textiles. He had his own collection of historical textiles. He used the Victoria and Albert Museum's collection, and he also he advised the Victoria and Albert Museum collection as well. Probably this aspect of his work is probably better known in terms of his carpet design, and we will see one carpet in a moment. But I think that all of Morris's designs really share some sort of aspect of his knowledge of historical patterns, not just medieval patterns, not just pre-Raphael patterns, but patterns up into the 17th and 18th century. This brings us to the last room in the exhibition. This is dedicated to Morrison Company's work for his designs that were used in the Glesner House, which is a historical site here in Chicago. The Glesners, it still exists at 1800 South Prairie Avenue. The Glesners hired, that's John and Frances Glesner, hired Boston-based architect Henry Hobson Richardson to design a new home for them in the 1880s. They moved in 1887. Both Mrs. Glesner and Richardson were particularly enthusiastic about the work of Morris through his writings. Richardson actually visited Morris in London in the early 1880s and was very much influenced by him, using many Morris textiles in his own home in Boston. This is a view looking in the opposite direction of the Gallery 57, our gallery, well, you wouldn't know the gallery number, but the last gallery in the exhibition, which is again dedicated to the Glesner House. And here you get a view of two of the textiles that actually came to us from the Glesner House. On the wall is the door curtain or portiere designed by May Morris in a pattern that is called Lotus. And then on the platform is the carpet that was purchased for the Glesner House entryway. This carpet is known as the Swan House carpet. It was originally made for a client in the early 1880s, a British client, for his home in London, which was called Swan House. The client's name was Wickham Flower. We believe that all of the Morris textiles that were used in the Glesner House in the 1880s were purchased through the Marshall Field Company, though there was at least one other purveyor who was selling Morrison Company works in Chicago. We believe most of these were purchased at Marshall Fields. Morris's textiles, Morris's carpets show a very deep knowledge of traditional carpets from the Middle East, particularly Persian carpets, with their central medallions, the repeating field, and then the series of small to large borders. Here we have one of many fantastic documentary photos of the Glesner House. This is from a 1903 publication that John Glesner wrote for his children, Fanny and George. You can see the carpet as it is it would be in the entry hall. Behind us is the main entrance. You see the staircase going up to the second floor, and then there's very deep doorways that you see lead to, on the left-hand side, the parlor, and then sort of straight ahead is to one of the back hallways. In addition to showing textiles that were actually used in the Glesner House, because there is such good documentation about what was purchased for the Glesner House, how it was installed, through Frances Glesner's copious writings, 5,000 pages she left in a journal documenting the activities of their life in the house, the decorating of the house, the meals they had in the house. So in addition to objects that actually came from the Glesner House, we know a lot about other furnishings that were used there. And so this peacock and dragon design, a woven wool design, we know was used in the entry hall as door curtains, both into the far hallway and then also on the hall side into the parlor. This fabric was also used in Richardson's home in Boston. Here is, again, a whole close-up of the door curtain, the Portier, which was designed by May Morris. This is an interesting, a very interesting piece in the collection. It was given to us by the Glesners in 1918. It came to the Art Institute with the remains of the 4 other door curtains. So they would have been pairs of door curtains on the interior parlor side, in the parlor of the Glesner House. 3 of the curtains were apparently in such sad shape that they were discarded, much to my dismay, because of course they could have provided us with lots of evidence about the stitching. However, this one, while extremely fragile, was in good enough shape to keep. I'm going to show you here, this is the one image we have of the parlor in which, you know, it's very hard to see, but in which we may see the portieres hanging. They would have been gathered up onto rings, pairs again on either side of the deep doorway in the parlor. So we're looking toward the portieres in the late 1800s. We're looking toward the, and we're looking out into the large entry hall. The director of the Glesner House, Bill Tyre, and I have discussed the making of the portieres. We know that Mrs. Glesner actually had them embroidered at what was then called the Decorative Arts Society here in Chicago, which is now known as the Antiquarian Society. In its early phases, the Decorative Arts Society actually acted as both a gathering place, but also a place where people could learn crafts, and women could learn embroidery, particularly if they might then have to make a living. So we suspect that Mrs. Glesner purchased these designs, purchased 4 panels of lotus with a design drawn out, but she purchased them as kits, not because they were less expensive, and they could have been 1/10 of the price to purchase versus to purchase as a kit versus purchasing the entire completed embroidery. But we think that she envisioned this as a philanthropic endeavor and paid the Decorative Arts Society, people working and learning how to embroider at the Decorative Arts Society, to complete the curtains for her. Again, Bill Tyre, despite the fact that we have copious notes from Mrs. Glesner, we don't have evidence of that, but this is something that we think was probably the case. Again, a couple of other patterns that are in the Art Institute collection that we know were used in the Glesner House. 2 wallpapers we know were used in the upstairs bedroom: Poppy, designed in 1881, and Sunflower, designed in 1879. These are the examples that we have in the Art Institute collection. We are not 100% sure of the colors that were used in the used in the Glesner House. Sometimes colors are described, but of course the photos are black and white. And lastly, I want to show you this interesting juxtaposition of a pattern called Kennet. On the right-hand side, we have 1/2 of a curtain fragment that belongs to the Art Institute that was actually used in the Glesner House. This was part of a set of window curtains that were used in the parlor. And on the left, we have the printed cotton version. Now, today, as I've mentioned, with the Sanderson Company repeating and adapting designs, we know that many designs can be purchased in many forms. They can be a printed cotton, they can be a woven, they can be an embroidery, they can be a wallpaper. However, Kennet is one of the few patterns that was actually intended to be created in 2 different techniques, in 2 different media: woven silk or printed cotton, during Morris's lifetime. Kennet is also, as an aside, one of the river-named tributaries of the Thames, one of the river-named patterns. And again, you see the meandering stem holding these large stylized flower heads and the large leaves. And here you see Kennet installed on the left, and 2 other patterns that are in the Art Institute collection that we know were used in the Glesner House. Acanthus on the far left is looks a bit more orange here, but it is a red on red printed velveteen. And then what I think is one of the more unusual William Morris designs. We have 2 fragments of a design simply called Butrect Velvet, which is a stamped wool pile fabric. This is actually a copy of a 1730s, probably French design, but it is referred to as Utrecht velvet because it is the type of fabric that was made from the 17th century in the Low Countries. So it is a stamped velvet. This was used in several colors in the Glesner House. It was produced, we know from Morrison Company records, in as many as 14 colors. So it was installed in the Glesner House in the late 1880s. And again, further evidence of how the longevity of Morrison Company patterns. It was also installed on the Titanic in what was called the Dutch suite. So it was still considered a popular furnishing fabric as late as 1912. So I will thank you for your attention. This is my last image here. I just want to point out that in addition to the Bryan family and the Crabtree Farm Foundation, we have been supported by the Elizabeth Cheney Foundation, which has supported the museum and the Department of Textiles for several decades. We're also supported by our Gordon and Carol Siegel Exhibition Fund, and the Sanderson Design Group did donate the pure acorn wallpaper that's used throughout the exhibition. So again, thanks for your attention and your support and your interest in William Morris and his collaborators. I will, shall I stop sharing, or would you like to keep the slides up?
I think you could stop sharing, Melinda. That would be okay. We can look at each other.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Melinda. And if you're ready for them, I have a few questions for you.
Ready as I'll ever be.
From our audience. So I'm going to start with, at the very beginning of your presentation, you showed the H&M dress, which I recall was a very popular collaboration that was done. I've always wondered, what would William Morris think about his designs being used in that way? And what, just in your opinion, and just what your thoughts were about that collaboration.
Right. I have the sense that William himself was a very generous man. And if one thought that this was going to make them happy to wear pimpernel as a dress, he would say, go for it. There's actually, I've only come across one image of a Morris pattern being used in fashion in the early 20th century, actually. So it would have been after Morris died. And it is, oh goodness, I'm forgetting her name. Gustav Klimt's lover and partner, who was a fashion designer. Someone here is going to know. She used a Morris pattern in one of her works. Oh, it'll come to me. I will say also, this reminds me of a question that I had a couple of months ago, where someone asked me if I felt like William Morris could be viewed as a professional akin to Frank Lloyd Wright in terms of trying to control, because he could create a total environment the way that Frank Lloyd Wright did. But I would say, and I think that probably, hopefully, most of you would agree with me, that they were very different in their approach. And again, I think Morris was a very generous person. If you want to buy one fabric, great. If you want to decorate your whole home from attic to basement in Morris, great, or anything in between, where obviously Frank Lloyd Wright controlled every aspect. And it was all or nothing with Frank Lloyd Wright. So I think they were very different. So that's another reason that I think that William Morris probably would say, sure, make a dress. I think he would probably take issue with the quality of the fabric.
That's my feeling too. What's not his design,
right? The quality of the fabric itself,
and environmental aspects. Is it Jessica
Indeed.
McClintock you were thinking of?
I'm sorry?
Jessica McClintock, was that the
Oh, no. This was the painter Gustav Klimt's partner.
Not Floge.
Yes. Emily Floge. Yes.
Floge.
Yes.
Also, Jessica McClintock did a line of William Morris dresses.
Yes. Oh. And here we go. Someone says, Google says Emily Floge. Yes. Yeah. That is indeed her.
Yeah. All right. Another question. is, do you see any influence from Eastern textiles in Morris's work?
Definitely. And I think that I don't mean to imply that he was, when I say he was knowledgeable about historical textiles, that he was only looking at Western textiles. Certainly not. No, I was looking at Persian and Indian carpets. And also, I mean, this probably would have been the right audience for me to talk a bit more in depth about Renaissance Italian textiles, textiles from the Italian peninsula, which were also very much influenced by textiles from the East as well. So that I certainly could have taken that step. And so I slightly oversimplified that, but certainly very knowledgeable about historical textiles globally.
Okay. Were the lantern slides that you mentioned on display in the exhibition? And if so, what conservation measures and considerations were necessary in order to display them?
Interesting you should ask that. We did not use the lantern slides themselves. They're only about 2.5 inches square. So it would have been impossible to see the details of any of the images. I did have a conversation with my colleague, the head of the photography department, and I thought, oh, wouldn't they be charming? There were these wonderful little objects, but we would then have to project it or print it anyway. So we used them and tried to be very clear about the fact that these were printed images. We used them as didactic texts on the wall. They also exist as prints in other collections. So the lantern slide format wasn't the only format that the Frederick Evans photographs existed in. For those of you who have been paying attention to the recent renovation and reopening of Kelmscott Manor, I did see probably on Instagram that the Frederick Evans images were referenced as primary sources for that renovation. So yet another reason to want to go.
All right, another question. Why did these particular designs, William Morris's designs, as opposed to others from the same time period, become so popular, apart from marketing?
This, in one sense, is the sort of $1 million question, $6 million question, $10,000 question, whatever we're using these days as a marker of a difficult question. His philosophy resonated with so many people. The philosophy of the arts and crafts movement, his philosophy of going back to handcraft, of giving artists, artisans, everyone who was involved in the process some agency in the process, resulted in, I think, feeling the consumer being able to feel better about buying Morris products, but also to garner some understanding of how the products were made and to appreciate the handcraft in the products. So that also, of course, manifests itself in an aesthetic. The colors that you see in Morris and Company of the late 19th century are not the colors you would see in, say, aniline dyed silks or other types of textiles that were made with new chemically derived dyes. So he's specifically going back to naturally derived dyes, which, there's always a dichotomy in his work. It is a business, it was a business, it still is a business. They have to produce a certain amount of product, but it was relatively slow to produce. That's part of the idea, part of the cachet as well. Hand knotted carpets versus carpets that were made by machine, but also hand knotted carpets that were made, if one can take at face value the images of young women who are working in the factory. There's a lot of light. They have a comfortable bench. It's not the kind of child labor that we think of associated with hand knotting carpets in other areas of the world. So there was a lot to be said for the reputation for handcraft, for the aesthetic of these softer colors. It really is in that way, I think, a whole package.
I think you could also say that modern consumers have sometimes have very
Sure.
similar motivations. So,
Sure, absolutely.
um,
I actually, I know you may have another question, but I see that Lynn Hulse is on the screen. So hello, Lynn, welcome. And thank you for all your fantastic work on embroideries of the arts and crafts movement and May Morris.
all right. My next question was about just kind of your observations from this exhibition of just kind of the responses and questions you've received from visitors who maybe were unfamiliar with Morris before viewing this exhibition.
I have to say most people seem to have had some familiarity with Morris, which I find really interesting. But that is the audience who we are, that's the audience that we're attracting. When I work on exhibitions at the Art Institute, we're right across this from the School of the Art Institute, and I do think about the constituency of the students quite a lot. And I think about these young, creative, smart people who are, and how do I bring them into, how do I interest them in the world of a designer, a dead British designer from the Victorian era? There is still such an appeal to the patterns, to the repeating patterns, to the coloration, to his personality, his character, his work ethic, his life as a polymath, as someone who's constantly exploring, constantly asking questions. And I have to say too, so the fact that someone like the painter Kehinde Wiley is finding interest and value and a narrative in the work of Morris is a huge plus. For me, it's a great way in when I'm speaking to students. But I was concerned about that, but the work is really strong, and the aesthetic, it has an appeal. I thought I would find the answer. What is the answer? There are so many answers to so many reasons for the appeal of Morris. I think we could all probably agree on some, and we would all come up with as many reasons as there are people on the call.
And this leads really well into the next question, which is, the ubiquity of William Morris's designs. One person mentioned that the scale of them is often off, in that something will be very small and scaled down to size, like if it's like on a cell phone case, or very large to the point where the image is distorted, like such as on a comforter of a bed, and how, this kind of ubiquity has maybe led to a decline in the actual design, the real the purity of the design, and what were your thoughts and what you think Morris's thoughts would be on that?
Oh, I'm sure. Certainly, he was intentional in making, for instance, the river named pattern Wandle. That flower head is like this. It's not meant to be like this, and it's not meant to be. It is meant to be a certain size. So I do think, using the Pimpernel dress and the H&M collaboration as an example, those patterns have been changed in scale a little, but not dramatically. And so the patterns do feel, they do feel large for an item of fashion, but they do kind of reflect the fact that we're basically, you're looking at furnishing fabrics. Yeah, I think, some of the patterns, a pattern like Eyebright or Brer Rabbit is perhaps more flexible. The monochrome patterns are perhaps more flexible, but yeah, it's a problem it's I don't think they make great yoga tights, but I've seen them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Not licensed by Sanderson.
I would think not. All right. Well, I think that sums up all of our questions. There were some really great links in the chat showing some dresses from the 1880s that used Morris's designs. And so those will be interesting to look at.
Oh, fantastic.
So, but thank you so much.
So, well, I knew that there would certainly be people on the call who had more knowledge about one area or another than me. So I thank you all for sharing your knowledge as well.
And I did want to make a quick announcement before everybody leaves about our next presentation, which ties in really well to this one. And we will be hearing from William Tyre, who William Tyre will be speaking on June 8th at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. He is the executive director and curator of the Glesner House, and we saw multiple images of the Glesner House in Melinda's presentation. It is a National Historic Landmark in Chicago. And in December 1887, the Glesner family moved into their new home in Chicago's Prairie Avenue, and it was designed by America's leading architect, Henry Hobson Richardson. Francis Glesner was well informed on current English decorating trends, and he selected numerous items for her home, ranging from Morris & Co. wallpapers, textiles, and rugs to Benson lamps and De Morgan fireplace tiles. The lecture will explore the house in detail and showcase the original furnishings, more of 90% of which are still in place. And it will also discuss Frances Glesner's support for the local arts and crafts community and her own talents as an expert needlework, silversmith, and jewelry maker. So I hope everybody will be able to join us then.
Well, thank you all very much, and certainly listen to Bill Tyre next week because he is fantastic. I can't overstate how helpful he has been to us. We've just had some really great conversations. And come to Chicago and go to the Glesner House.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Melinda.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.